Alright guys and girls, welcome back to another fun-filled, action-packed, non-flipped Algebra 2 classroom video. And today it's going to be about using the quadratic formula to solve for x in quadratic functions. Okay, so the screen's frozen, there we go. Okay, so we're going to skip these warm-up parts. You can check the answers and how to work these out with the key later on, but let's go to the quadratic formula. This is the main topic of the day. And it's another way you can find the solutions or the roots, what x equals, when you have quadratic equations or quadratic functions. So it's a quadratic, so it's got to be of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. All right? So this formula will tell you what x equals, pretty much letting you know where your graph crosses the x-axis, okay? So the formula's right there. You don't need to memorize the formula. If you have to use the formula, we'll give you the formula, okay? So you don't need to memorize this formula, but you do need to know how to actually use it, all right? And the biggest struggle is going to be not making algebraic simple mistakes like moving negative signs or multiplication throughout the steps, okay? So before you can start, though, you got to make sure your equation's set equal to 0, and you need to make sure that your terms are lined up from highest power of x to lowest power, okay? So we're just going to do some examples here. On number 1, right here we got x squared minus 14x plus 24 equals 0. Is that already set equal to 0? Yes, it is. Are the terms lined up in highest power to lowest power? Yes, they are, because we got the x squared first, then we got the x, and then we have the term that doesn't even have an x. So it's lined up exactly like we want it. So we need to identify a, b, and c. What is a? 1. That's the number in front of the x squared. What is b? Negative 14. And what is c? 24, right. Okay, so to avoid making mistakes, I like to write out the formula and just put parentheses everywhere I see a variable, right? So I'm going to write it x equals negative, and then I leave a parentheses, plus minus square root of parentheses, because that's supposed to be b squared, minus 4 times a, parentheses, times c, all over 2 times a. And so now we fill in these parentheses with what our values actually are. Okay, so I want you to tell me what goes in each set of parentheses. What goes in this very first set right there? Which is? Negative 14. What goes in this set that is next to the squared? B squared. So what should I put in there? Negative 14 again. Okay, what goes? No. What goes into this next parentheses right there? 1. And then what goes into that last parentheses that's inside the square root? 24. And finally, what goes in the parentheses on the bottom? 1. There we go. So that is the first step, to actually substitute our values in. Okay? So now we're going to simplify until we get our solutions. So the next step is to simplify everything as much as possible. So right here we've got negative 14. What does that become? Positive 14. Very good. Then plus or minus. We're going to simplify the terms inside the parentheses. So what is negative 14 squared? 14 times 14, right? If you don't know right off the top of your head, right, then just write it out. 14 times 14. How do we learn multiplication back in the day? Like this. 4 times 4 is 16. What did you say? What did you say it was? It is 196. So even if you do like this, right, the original 196. So 196, and then what is negative 4 times 1 times 24? Negative 4. Times 1 times 24, right? What is that? Negative 4 times 24. Right, it's negative 4 times 24, which is what? So if I do 24 times 4, that's 16. 1, 2 times 8, 9. Negative 96. So we're going to put negative 96 right there, minus 96, over what? 2. Over 2. Okay, the next step now after we've multiplied those terms out is to simplify what's inside the square root. So we got x equals 14 plus or minus square root of 196 minus 96. What is that? 100 over 2. Okay, after you've combined the terms inside the square root, then you want to simplify the square root expression if you can. So we've got x equals 14 plus or minus 10. The square root of 100 is 10 over 2. Get this out of the way real quick. All right. And then divide by 2, right? We can do that, or you always, because sometimes you're not going to actually be able to divide, right? It doesn't go in evenly. What?
You can do it by itself and then do it. Like simplify that. Like
Right. So yeah, so as Lacey's saying, yeah, you could just do 14 plus 10 divided by 2, 14 minus 10 divided by 2. But to make it easier on yourselves and work with smaller numbers, you want to reduce the fraction. So that means, is there a number that divides all of these numbers? What? 2. 2. Because 2 can go into all of these numbers. So if we can just divide all of the numbers by 2. So that means we have x equals, what's 14 divided by 2? 7 plus or minus 5. Right, and it would be over 1, but there's no point writing over 1, right? That doesn't change anything. Okay, so these are my two answers, and we got x equals 7 plus or minus 5. Right? Whoa. And? That's right. So one of my answers is going to be x equals?
X equals 2, x equals 12.
That's right, x equals 12 and x equals 2. Very good. And that is how you use the quadratic formula to get your two answers. X equals 12 and x equals 2.
That's too much work just to get a simple answer.
Basically doing the same thing but different.
Let's go to example 2 now. So with example 2, it's x squared plus 4 equals 7x. What is wrong with how it's set up right there?
You need to subtract 7x.
Right, because it has to be set equal to 0. So we subtract 7x, and what is the new equation then?
X squared minus 7x plus 4 equals 0.
That's right. And why did you put the minus 7x second?
Because it has an x.
Right, because that's x on it. You have to go from highest power to lowest power, right? Okay, so now that we have everything in the right order, what is my A? 1. What's B? And what is C? 4. Very good. Okay, so now we're going to set up the equation right. X equals negative B plus or minus the square root of, B squared minus 4 times A times C. All over 2A. All right, so we're going to fill in these parentheses then. What goes in this very first set of parentheses on the top left? Negative 7. What goes into this next one right here? Again, what goes next to the 4? 1. And what goes after that? 4. And then finally on the bottom, what goes next to that 2? 1. There we go. So it's just substituting numbers in. Next, then, we're going to simplify what we see there. We got x equals, what is negative 7? What is negative? Negative 7. Positive 7. Plus or minus, square root. What is negative 7 squared? 49. And then we have negative 4 times 1 times 4. What's that? Negative 16. All over 2. That's right. Okay, what's the next step after this, though? That's right, combine in the square root, right? So x equals 7 plus or minus square root of, what is 49 minus 16? 33. It's over 2. And what do you try to do next after that? Right, you try to simplify the square root, that's right. But does the square root of 33 simplify? No, it doesn't. Hyman's shaking his head vigorously. It doesn't simplify, so that means you got to just leave it like this. Then you check to see if you can reduce at all. Can you reduce all three of those terms? No, because we got a 7 right there, a 2 right there, as an invisible 1 in front of the square root, right? So we can't reduce this fraction at all, so that's our answer, just right there. So that one's not very long at all. Okay. All right, number 3. Right here, what do I need to do on number 3 first? Add the 2x, that's right. So what's my new equation? There we go. Okay, so what is A then? 1. What's B? And what is C? That's right, so I'm going to set up my equation. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Okay, what goes in the first parentheses? 2. What goes in the parentheses inside the square root right here? What goes next? 1. And what's this final one right there? Negative 48. And what goes in the bottom parentheses? A 1. Okay, so let's simplify. So we have x equals, what does this right here become? This beginning part. Negative 2, right? We just attached the negative onto the 2. That's a negative 2. Then we got plus or minus square root. What is 2 squared? 4. And what is negative 4 times 1 times negative 48? Do that off to the side over here. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 48. So we're just going to do that off to the side here. Negative 48 times negative 4. 8 times 4 is 32. 4 times 4 is 16. 192. So positive 192 over 2. Let me put that line a little closer. Okay. What's next after this? Combine inside the square root sign, right? So x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of, what's 192 plus 4? 196 over 2. What's the step after we combine inside the square root? Simplify what? The square root. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus, what is the square root of 196? 14 over 2. So now we have negative 2 plus or minus 14 over 2. What should we do next here? So you can just add the, you can just work it out right from there. Right. Okay, right. So, or you can do a Jaime saying, which is to make all the numbers smaller by reducing, because all of these numbers can be divided by 2. And if we do that, what do we get? X equals negative 1, 7, and that's it, right? Because it would be over 1. Over 1 is not necessary. So that means, here's my two answers. We got x equals negative 1 plus 7, and that's right. So one of my answers, x equals, what's negative 1 plus 7? 6. And we got x equals negative 8. Very good. And there's the two answers. X equals 6 and x equals negative 8. All right, on to number 4. Looking at number 4, is that equation in the form that we want it to be?
Yes.
It is?
No.
What's wrong with it? What's wrong with the 8x? It's supposed to be in the middle, right? So what should my equation be then? That is correct. We just move them around, right? We just move them around into the right order. So what is A? What is B?
8.
Is it 8? Negative 8, look. Negative 8. And what is C? 5. So I'm going to write the formula out again. X equals negative b plus or minus the square roots of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So let's fill in these parentheses. What goes in the very first parentheses? What goes in the second one? Right? What goes in this parentheses after the 4? And what goes in this third parentheses right there? And then what goes in the bottom? 2. Right, it's the A, which is 2. Very good. So now let's multiply things out that we can multiply. What is this negative 8? That becomes positive 8. Plus or minus the square root. What is negative 8 squared right here? Negative 8 squared. 64, because it's negative 8 times negative 8. 64. And then what is negative 4 times 2 times 5? negative 40. All over? 4. All right. What's the step after that? Simplify inside the square root, right? So we got x equals 8 plus or minus the square root of, what's 64 minus 40? 24 over 4. Now what do we want to do? Simplify what? Simplify the square root, right? So what can we simplify the square root of 24 into? And 6 times 4. So we can change that square root of 24 into the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. And that's very helpful because what is the square root of 4? 2. So then this can be turned into x equals 8 plus or minus what? 2? Right, 2 square roots of 6 over 4. It's a 4 on the bottom. Okay? Now that we're at this point, we want to try to reduce, right? So, can we reduce all these numbers by the same number? Yes. What? By what number? 2. By 2. Okay, so it's going to be x equals, I need some more space probably. X equals what? 4 plus or minus 1 1 square root of 6 over 2. And also that 1 square root of 6, right? You don't need to write the 1 because it's pointless to say 1 times square root of 6, right? So you want to just write plus or minus the square root of 6 over 2. And that's your final answer because you can't reduce it anymore. And so that's it right there.
Wait, why is it over 2?
Because you got to divide everything by 2. The top and the bottom. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, right? This 2 divided by 2 is 1, so it's invisible. And then the bottom, 4 divided by 2 is 2.
Oh, okay.
Got it? All right. Let's go to number 5 now. The last 2 examples. Number 5. What do we need to do to number 5 before we can start here?
Move the x.
We got to move the negative 2x, so what's the new equation going to be?
2x squared minus 2x.
Equals 0? Need some water up in here. Okay. So what is A? 2. What is B? And what is C? Good. So we set up the equation x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So let's fill in these parentheses. What goes in the very first parentheses? Negative 2. What goes in the one inside the square root? Negative 2. What goes next to the 4? And what goes after that? And what goes on the bottom? 2. All right, so let's multiply the things out that we can. So we got x equals, what is negative? Negative 2?
2.
That's positive 2. Cancels out. We got plus and minus square root of, what is negative 2 squared? 4. And then we have negative 4 times 2 times negative 3. What's that? Negative 24? Positive 24, because there's 2 negative signs in there. So it's going to be positive. So we can put plus 24. Right? Over what? Over 4. Okay, now we want to... Where? Inside the square root. So x equals 2 plus or minus square root of 28, right? Over 4. Now what? What is next? Simplify what? Simplify the square root, right? We got x equals 2 plus or minus. What can we break down square root of 28 into? 4 and 7. Very good. So we're going to go plus or minus square root of 4 times square root of 7. Because 4 times 7, that's 28. Good. Over 4, right? And the whole point of doing that is so that we can change the square root of 4 into a what? 2, right. Yeah. Caught me, man. Red-handed. X equals 2 plus or minus? 2?
Square root of 7.
That's right. Over 4, right.
So is that our answer?
Is that your answer?
It should be.
Is it? You stop there?
No.
What do you think?
We can simplify 2 over 4.
You can simplify to 4, right?
Like,
You can reduce this. Yeah, you can reduce it by what? By 2. All of those numbers can be divided by 2. So we're going to do that. So my
Divided by the number that is divided by?
yes, if all 3 of the numbers can be divided by the same number, then do that.
Okay.
So they can be reduced by 2, right? Because you got a 2, we got a 2, and we got a 4.
But so since we know 2 divided by 2 is 1, you don't need to put the 1 here, right?
You need to put the 1 in this very first one, that matters, right?
Yeah.
But over here where it's 1 times square root of 7, that one doesn't matter.
Okay.
So what's my final answer going to be then?
X equals 1 plus or minus square 7
Over?
over 2.
That's right. There you go. Perfect. Yeah, you don't need to put the 1 next to the square root of 7 because 1 times something, you know, is still whatever it was. So that one's pointless. But you do need the 1 at the beginning, right? See, because... Nah, whatever. We're going to leave it at that. All right. Okay, and we got one last example over here. This is a special one. So, yeah, this is a special one. Number 6. 9x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Is it already in the form that we want it to be? Yes, it is. It's set equal to 0. It's lined up from highest power to lowest power. So what is A?
9.
What is B?
4, 4.
And what is C?
3.
Alrighty. So let's set up this equation. The formula x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2a. So let's fill in these parentheses. What goes in the very first blank? 4. Is it negative?
No, it's
Positive. So 4. Okay, then what goes in the parentheses inside the square right there? 4. What goes next to this 4 right here?
9.
And then what goes in the last one next to that 9? 3. And what's on the bottom? 9. Alright, so let's do some simplifying over here. Whoa, hold on. Okay. X equals negative 4, that's right. Plus or minus.
8.
What's 4 squared? 4 times 4, 16, yes. Now we've got negative 4 times 9 times 3. What is that? Wow, that's right. Negative 108 over 18. Alrighty, so what's next? Whoa, I know, that's what I'm saying. X equals, right, we're going to subtract what's inside the square root. We're going to simplify that.
X equals negative 4 plus or minus negative 92.
That's right, square root of negative 92. Don't forget to say square root of negative 92 over 18. Hold on, wait a minute.
Oh, geez.
What looks weird about that? What's negative?
Square root.
The square root's negative. Whoa, wait a second. You can't have that. Have you ever tried doing that in the calculator or your phone?
That says error.
Yeah, it says error. So you've tried this. Okay. So it says error. All right, so when that happens, make a note to yourself, right? This negative inside the square root. So, you know, that doesn't work. That's an error. So that means your answer is going to be not just like that. Let's make it more specific.
Pacific.
Pacific. All right.
Pacific, the ocean, you said.
No real solutions. That's what you're going to write. No real solutions. Now, I'm specifying the real because we're actually going to be learning about imaginary solutions. Yeah, so, you know, those are solutions, but they're not real. They're imaginary, yep. Yeah, so for now, we don't know about the imaginary yet, so we're going to put no real solutions. Anyways, these are all the different types of problems you'll encounter so far with the quadratic equation, quadratic formula. So that's going to end these notes. So until next time, peace!